Dots. I'm Dr. Latifat. I'm the host of the MoneyfitMD podcast. This is where we help badass women physicians just like you learn simple and effective tools to build wealth from the inside out. That way, we can create wealth and bigger impact without all the burnout. Enjoy the episode. Hey guys, welcome to another episode. I'm so glad that you tuned in to join me today. So excited. Today's episode is going to be lit. Yes, it will be. Okay, why am I laughing? I'm laughing because I'm thinking about what I'm going to talk about. And I know some of y'all are about to, get a touch stressed. But it's a good thing. So I want to talk about a topic that I've heard so much about and I see so much about, and I've been thinking about talking about it for probably about a year now. And now I think I'm ready to have a conversation with you guys on it, on my podcast, on my YouTube, on my, wherever you're watching this clip from. And it's a whole conversation about privilege. Privilege when it comes to money, privilege when it comes to wealth building, privilege when it comes to what you can do and cannot do. And part of what's brought up this conversation about privilege is like when I'm listening, or like if you're in a Facebook group or something and someone says something and it's like, oh, privilege, right? Privilege. And I'm not one of those people that believe that privilege is a bad thing. In fact, I believe that privilege is relative and we all have privilege in one way or the other. And we may be underprivileged in some shape or form. So, for example, when I think about myself, I think about my journey. I mean, I'm privileged to be able to be here talking with you guys, being a physician that practices GI in the United States, right? Because when I think back to 20 whatever years ago before I moved here to this country, it wasn't like I knew I was going to move out of the country, right? Like the version of me and the trajectory of things didn't look like I was going to go anywhere. Like I literally told my kids recently, my youngest one is 6 years old and this child's been to 20 countries. I'm like, what the heck? Well, she will be very soon. I think at the time of this recording, probably 18. But very soon she would have been to about 20 countries. And I did not get on a freaking plane till I was 18. Yeah, 17 or 18, right? And so I had the privilege to be born with parents, period, right? If someone is born out on the streets, they may not have the same access that I do. I was born in Nigeria with parents. That's privilege right there. I was born to parents that valued education because they were not educated, and they're like, okay, there are opportunities in life. They saw the future and they're like, you're a girl, you guys are girls, we have one boy, and they believe that if we got educated we have better chances in life. That is freaking privilege right there, right? But when I look at the version of me that didn't know that I was going to be where I am today, the version of me that didn't know that I was gonna migrate or move to a different country, that version of myself had a different kind of privilege than the version of myself that ended up having access to this because of relational privilege that we ended up having, right? So I don't believe that privilege is a bad thing. What I believe is a bad thing or can be hurtful is lack of awareness about your privilege to the point where you're bragging about pulling yourself up some bootstraps nonsense. And I also think what could be hurtful or unhelpful is privilege with scarcity, where you're not extending your privilege to those that may be less privileged than you, because you believe that their access means less for you. I don't believe there's one pie that we all get to cut a piece from. I believe that the pie gets bigger the more of us want some of the pie. That's my belief. I believe in abundance in that way. So the privilege is, I'm going to simplify this. So if you're a privileged PhD, this may be one for you to skip on because you're I did not get a PhD in privilege, but I'm going to tell you how I break it down. I break it down into two: the privilege that we cannot change and the privilege that we can change. The privilege that we cannot change is what happens when you're born in a family that maybe has resources. The privilege that we cannot change is when you belong to a certain skin color in a place where that's a favorable thing, or whether you belong to a religion that may be like a major part of that culture. So during our travel, we went to Morocco. In Morocco, I have Muslim family. I am Christian. My Muslim family would have more privilege in Morocco than I would. Religion was something that came up, and you always have to be respectful of whatever countries you visit. So of course we were respectful, but like my family that's Muslim would have more privilege in Morocco than me that was a Christian. Or the same as in, say, Thailand. If you're Buddhist, you may have more privilege than if you were maybe Muslim, or if you were Christian, or if you were a different, subsect, right? So what counts as privilege is going to change based on the situation, the circumstance you're in, the country you're in, the region you're in, the language you speak, right? Your gender, and those are the things. Of course, we know that gender and color of skin predominantly in the US, we know that, if you're Caucasian and if you're Christian and if you're a woman, you have a higher chance of having a man. I wish women had privilege, but I wish. I can only dream that we can all just be like equal before the law, right? Kind of deal. So there is privilege that we can change, and there is privilege that we cannot change. Those ones we cannot change necessarily because we were born with it, right? But again, your privilege or my privilege is not a problem. The problem is when scarcity comes in and we don't extend that. We don't bridge. We don't think of ourselves as bridge for other people to be able to access. The ones that we cannot change, right? That we're not going to talk about today. But what I'm going to say about it though is there's no shame in having privilege, just the same way there should be no shame in not having privilege, however way you define that, understanding that it's relative, right? When I think about when I moved to the United States, right, I spoke English, but my accent was different. I had to speak multiple times in class for someone in the class to understand enough to like tell the professor what I was saying, like translate my English to English so the professor can understand. In that situation, I was not in a place of privilege relative to people that maybe spoke the accent however way the professor did, right? But also when I think about being someone that is Black and moved to the United States as opposed to someone that was a descendant of slaves, you can see how the privilege is also different. I'm more privileged compared to them from that perspective, even though when it comes to language, they may be in a place of privilege compared to me, right? So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that none of us are without any privilege at all. It's all relative, right? So I cannot change the fact that I was born where I was born with who I was born, which I'm glad I was. So shame about that is useless, right? And again, whatever I can do to bridge the gap for you, to use my privilege, because I believe in abundance, that's what I want. So what I want us to talk about is the privilege that we can change, the privilege that you and I can change. Because like I remember a post on Facebook about someone posting that if someone took a year off, some person that I'm not familiar with took a year off, not a physician, and someone posted in there, well, that sounds like a lot of privilege. And yes, it is. She's able-bodied. That's privilege. So am I. Yes, I'm privileged as well that I'm able-bodied. I'm privileged because I've also created some privilege for myself because of the actions and decisions and things that I've done. And so what I would like for you to take away from this episode is what I've talked about so far, but also how you can create privilege for yourself as well so that your past doesn't have to define your future. And the thing about it too is when you have privilege, I know that you're going to create opportunities and resources for more people. So that's why I'm teaching you how to create privilege, but also that's why I use my privilege for you to connect to you if you want to invest, right? The women in my community know that. Like, I literally invest in communities so that I can have access, so that my people can have access. I'm their privilege, and they can be privileges of other people as well, right? I think about one of the amazing women inside of our community who was raised by farm workers. When she looks around in her neighborhood, in her community, there's no one there by the inborn privilege, right? That knows the information that can build wealth. But now she's created like additional privilege through my own relational privilege. And now she's able to learn, right? And she's able to do things. She's invested passively. She's literally joined us about like 6 months ago. And she's invested in like 2 or 3 passive income sources this year already, right? She's maxing out her retirement account. Her family, they're having conversations that's up leveled about wealth building, right? So there is privilege that we may not be changed in the past, but there's privilege that we can change in future. And the way I'm going to actually share this privilege with you is sort of like what you probably don't want to do if you want to create privilege for yourself. And number one is this. In order to create privilege for yourself, you have to break patterns. That's number one. Okay? You have to break patterns. And I don't always agree with every single thing, but my job is to learn wisdom. My job is to learn understanding. My job is to learn interpretation of stuff and teach it to you guys so that instead of trying to swim against the current that takes us to nowhere, we can swim towards the current. We can get what we want to get, and then we can leverage it for good. That's my goal. That's my mission, right? So when I talk about changing patterns, money provides privilege. Wealth provides privilege. And there's a part of that that I don't honestly love, to be honest with you. However, that is the world we live in right now. That's the kind of economic world that we live in. So it's not all bad though, because if you think about it, privilege is why you're able to drive a car to work and get there in 30 minutes as opposed to taking the bus and getting there like 5 hours later or whatever, or maybe God knows when. Imagine if you had to do that, right? So it's not like it's all bad, but like breaking patterns that is going to lead you to money and to wealth building is super duper important if you want to create privilege for yourself, okay? Number two is you cannot spend all you earn and expect to create privilege for yourself. You cannot. You're literally creating a ceiling for your own privilege, right? Because when you're spending all you earn and you're not spending it on assets, and when I say spending all you earn, I mean you're spending on liabilities. You don't have an emergency fund. You're not letting your money make more money for you. You're not investing into your future. You're not providing for a future version of yourself. You're literally are ridding your future self of the privilege that could exist in future for you. Because remember that however way your finances are now, it's a result of the decisions you've made in the past. So if you want to create more privilege for yourself in future, it means that you cannot spend the way you're spending and expect that something miraculous is going to happen. Unless you're like, I don't know, win the lottery. But even if you win the lottery, to be honest, if you don't know how to manage it, you're going to lose it like everybody else that wins the lottery. So you cannot spend all you earn and expect to create privilege for your future self. Okay? Number three is you cannot rely on someone else and expect to create privilege for yourself. The relying 100% on someone else, that is the one we cannot change. That's the, family one that you cannot change, the family you're born into. You cannot change the color of your skin, and all that stuff. That is that one, right? However, you cannot rely on a spouse only. You cannot rely on a financial advisor only. You cannot rely on your CPA only. Like, you have to rely on yourself. Privilege is something that you get to create for yourself, because if you don't create that for yourself, you're always going to second guess yourself. You're always going to wonder what if something happens to those people that you're depending on. I believe in co-creating. I believe in codependency. But I don't believe in you being completely dependent on someone else and giving your power away to them, right? So you cannot create privilege for your future self if all you're doing is relying on someone else, okay? The next one is this. You cannot rely on earning only, especially when you're exchanging your time for money in a 1-to-1 ratio. The reason why I say that is there's a limit to how much you can work. You cannot work 80 hours. I mean, I guess we can. But you get my point. You cannot do that for long because you're going to not be healthy doing that, right? So if you think about how you're earning, if all you're doing is only earning when you're working, what that means is if you don't work, you don't earn. And if you don't work and you don't earn, it means that there's a ceiling to how much you can earn. There's a ceiling to how much privilege you can create for yourself when it comes to money and wealth building. Right? So you cannot rely on earning only, and especially earning in exchange for money, like we do in clinical medicine, where if you don't show up, you don't earn. Maybe you have your own practice, like you're the solo physician there. Maybe you work for someone and you get paid when you show up. You get paid for what you're contracted to get paid, right? So you have to change the patterns. You have to shift the pattern. And the patterns don't change by themselves. You have to change it. The patterns don't change when you earn more money. Pattern changes when you decide that you want to change it, right? And the way you change the pattern is to just take a different action. It's like if you normally would turn right, turn left. If you normally are someone that like you spend on bills only, then it's time for you to like before you even spend on bills, break the pattern, break the cycle by spending on an asset, right? The more you spend on assets, the more you will spend on asset, and that's a beautiful thing. Assets, badasses love assets. I love assets. I teach my people to love assets. I teach that they are assets. I teach that their life is an asset. I teach that they can buy and create assets, and I teach that they can grow assets. If that's the focus, everything else, including debt, falls into place, right? The relationship between you and money, relationship within yourself, thrives because you are an asset. Your life is an asset. So you spend in a way that grows that asset. That's the goal. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So you cannot rely on earning in exchange for money, 1-to-1 ratio. Just keep that in mind. And the thing is this, privilege is a great thing. Privilege is how you don't overwork and grind to death. It's how you take a pause. It's how you give to causes that you care about. It's how you practice medicine, what I call two butt cheeks. It's how you serve your patients at the top of, not just the top of your license, but the top of your ethics, the top of your compassion, the top of your ability. That's what happens when you have privilege that you create yourself. And that's what this is about. That's what this year is about. That's what the money moves you're making is about. What can you do to create your own privilege? Like, we're not going to sit down and look at others and talk about their privilege as if we don't have ours. It's all relative. And we're not going to shame others the same way we're not going to shame ourselves. I mean, sometimes I wish I had some other privilege, but it is what it is. And I can earn this privilege. I can create them by leveraging my money, by buying into communities, by getting into communities, by asking, by reaching out. I literally had a physician that was like, Latifah, I want to invest passively. Do you have any resources you can share? And do you guys know that within like 3 weeks, she invested in her first syndication? She'd been waiting for like a year to do that. That's one of the things I want to create more opportunities for this year, is how to help women physicians find places to grow their finances, whether it's active, whether it's passive. Like, that's my goal for my women inside of my community and in my greater community, including my podcast as well. So if you're not on my email list yet, go to moneyfitmd.com/guide. I want to make sure you're in there so that if there's anything that I'm sharing that I'm not announcing on my podcast, all the vents, all the treats, all the loves, all the love notes, all the tough love, all the compassionate, everything that I got, you guys get it in my email and inside of my private community as well. But I do hope that this has been helpful for you, because ultimately when you have privilege, it's a great thing for the world, because I know that you raise for others, you elevate others, you bring others into your world of privilege. People have extended their privilege to me, and I've done the same for others too. And imagine if we keep doing that on a bigger level, on a bigger continued growth level. What would change? What would change? So, what is one thing you're taking away from this podcast? Maybe 2 things that you're taking away from this podcast. How are you going to impute it into your life? Because I know you're not just here to hear in 2024. You're here to hear and integrate, hear and take action. Because learning alone doesn't change much. But learning and taking actions changes everything. I'm so glad you exist in my world. Thank you for listening to this episode. I love you. I'll see you in the next episode. And don't forget to leave us a review. I really, really would love to hear what you think about this episode. It takes 30 seconds. Just scroll to the bottom. Click those 5 stars that I love. Leave some words of love of why you love this episode. And maybe I'll give you a shout out on our social media or on the next episode. Thank you. I appreciate you. I love you. See you on the next episode. Goodbye.